The sun hadn't yet risen, casting long shadows along the cracked pavement of the small Ohio town. A thick fog lingered in the streets, the air crisp, carrying the scent of early morning dew mixed with the faint smell of coffee brewing somewhere nearby. On the corner of 5th and Main, Marissa Jackson stood alone, her hands tucked deep into the pockets of her worn jacket, the thick fabric soft with age but still holding its shape. The red brick buildings around her stood silent, as if they too knew the weight of her thoughts. It was too early to be awake, but there was no choice, no more luxury of sleeping in. The world didn't wait for her. It never did. Not for someone like her. She wasn't like the other women who walked these streets. Not anymore. Her life wasn't filled with the same kind of promises. Her mornings didn't have quiet breakfasts or the thrill of work ahead. Instead, it was just another day to get through. Another day of counting pennies and dodging the stares of people who thought she was invisible. Today, she wasn't even sure how she was going to make it through the day. The grocery bill from last week still hadn't been paid, and the rent was due again. She could already feel the familiar knot tighten in her chest. It was a pressure that never really went away, a weight that seemed to settle deeper the older she got. "Good morning, Marissa." The voice cut through the stillness, a friendly tone from across the street. Marissa looked up, seeing her neighbor, Emily, waving from her front porch. Emily's house was always the picture of order, the lawn neatly trimmed, the flower beds perfectly manicured. Marissa envied her. She didn't mean to, but she did. It was hard not to, especially when Emily's life seemed to be everything Marissa had lost, everything she would never have again. "Morning," Marissa called back, her voice sounding smaller than she meant it to. Emily's eyes flickered over her, a brief moment of concern crossing her face before she quickly masked it with a smile. "Got a minute?" Emily asked, stepping off her porch and heading toward Marissa. Marissa forced a smile, even though it felt like the weight of the world was holding her down. "I've got time. What's up?" She shoved her hands further into her pockets, trying to block out the cold and the sense of failure creeping up her spine. "Just wanted to check in. You're looking a little worn down." Emily hesitated, as if she wasn't sure how to phrase it. "Everything okay?" Marissa's heart sank. She knew what was coming. It wasn't just the pity in Emily's voice that bothered her. It was the truth she couldn't escape. The truth that every time someone looked at her with concern, it only reminded her of how small she was in the world, how insignificant her life seemed in the grand scheme of things. "I'm fine," Marissa lied, though it didn't come out with any real conviction. "Just tired, you know? Lot of work. Lot of bills." Emily didn't say anything right away, but the look on her face told Marissa that she wasn't buying it. "I get it," Emily said eventually, her tone softening. "If you need anything, just let me know. We're all in this together, right?" Marissa didn't know how to respond to that, so she just nodded. "Yeah, thanks." She could feel the warmth of Emily's concern, but it only made her feel more isolated. What did it mean to be in it together when the gap between them was so wide? As Emily walked back to her house, Marissa couldn't help but feel the sting of embarrassment. Here she was, standing on the corner of Main Street, wondering how she was going to pay for the bare essentials, while Emily was out there with her perfect lawn and her perfect life. Everything Marissa had worked for felt as if it had slipped through her fingers, one bad decision at a time. She shook her head, trying to push the thoughts away. There was no time for this, no time to wallow, not when she had so much to do. As Marissa walked to the bus stop, her shoes making a soft scuffing sound against the pavement, she replayed the conversation in her mind. She knew what people said about her behind her back. It wasn't hard to figure out. They said she'd never make it. They said she'd always be broke. And for the longest time, she believed them. Her ex-husband, Charles, had been the first to tell her, "You're always going to struggle, Marissa. You've got no head for money, no business sense. You're just not cut out for success." Those words had stuck with her, lodged deep in her mind, echoing every time she looked at the bills or checked her empty bank account. He wasn't the only one. Her own family had said it too. Her father had given up on her years ago. "You'll never get ahead if you keep acting like this," he'd said, his voice heavy with the disappointment he never quite managed to hide. Now she couldn't get rid of their voices. They had become her own voice, repeating their doubts in a constant loop. It felt like a curse, the weight of other people's expectations, their judgments, hanging over her every move. She looked up at the bus schedule, but the words blurred in front of her eyes. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest, and her hands shook slightly as she reached into her bag to pull out her phone. Checking the time, she realized she was going to be late for her shift at the diner. She couldn't afford to be late. Marissa hurried toward the bus, ignoring the exhaustion in her bones. She didn't have the luxury of stopping to catch her breath. Not anymore. As she climbed aboard the bus, she took her usual seat near the back, the one where she wouldn't be noticed. The bus driver greeted her with a grunt, but she didn't mind. People rarely looked at her these days. She wasn't the woman they remembered. The woman with potential, the one who used to dream big and talk about traveling the world. Now she was just the quiet one, the one who blended into the background. The bus rumbled to life, its engine humming beneath her as it made its way through the sleepy streets of the town. Marissa stared out the window, watching the houses go by, each one telling a story of someone else's life. Each one a reminder of what she didn't have. But something inside her stirred, a flicker of something she couldn't name. Maybe it was the realization that she was tired of being invisible. Tired of being the woman who lived in the shadows of other people's lives. Tired of being the one who just accepted things the way they were. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know how she was going to get from here to there. But she knew one thing. She was done waiting. She was done believing the lie that she would always be broke. There had to be more to her story than this. Marissa didn't feel the chill of the air as she stepped off the bus, the rhythm of her thoughts far louder than the world around her. She walked down the same quiet streets, her feet heavy, a mixture of exhaustion and resolve pressing down on her shoulders. The town, though familiar, seemed to mock her today. It was as if the walls, the pavement, even the wind, were all reminders of how little she had to show for her years of hard work. Nothing was changing. Nothing at all. She reached the diner, the familiar neon sign flickering above her, a low hum in the early morning light. The door opened with a squeak, and the smell of bacon, brewed coffee, and greasy spoon breakfast foods hit her as she entered. Her manager, Karen, stood at the counter, wiping it down with a rag. "Morning, Marissa," Karen said, her voice flat. "You're early today. Nice." Marissa nodded but didn't say anything. She just moved toward the back to put her things away in the small locker they'd given her. The hustle and bustle of the diner, the clanging of pots and pans, the sound of orders being called out, all blended into the background. She was used to it. This was her life and had been for years. She pulled on her apron, the fabric worn thin from overuse. Every part of her felt worn thin. Every time she thought about a new direction, the weight of everything that had gone wrong in her life came crashing back. Charles had been right, hadn't he? She wasn't good enough for the life she dreamed of. She wasn't even good enough for the life she had. She could feel the eyes of the regular customers on her as she passed by. She recognized their looks. They didn't say it, but she knew. They looked at her as though she was part of the background, just another fixture in the diner, invisible to most. They ordered their meals, tipped just enough, and left without even sparing a second glance. That was how it always was. Her first table of the day, a couple of middle-aged men, were sitting in their usual spot. Their faces were puffy from too many late nights, their voices thick with the casual comfort of familiarity. "Morning, Marissa," one of them mumbled, not even looking up from his phone. She gave a tight smile. "Morning, gentlemen. What can I get you today?" The orders came out in routine, the same as every other day, the same as they had been for the last 5 years. There was no excitement in the words, no interest in the way she took their orders. It was a job, a service. As she went about her work, filling orders and delivering plates to customers, a familiar knot tightened in her chest. The feeling was always there, the heavy realization that she would never be more than this, the girl who served, the one who was easy to overlook. She hadn't even finished the college courses she'd started. Life had gotten in the way, as it often did. Bills, rent, grocery lists. A constant cycle that had no room for dreams, only survival. Marissa stopped by the window and looked outside, her gaze drifting toward the old house she'd always passed on her walks. It had been for sale for months now, a fading for sale sign still posted in the yard. It had been a dream of hers for years, a home of her own, a place to finally feel settled, secure, free. The house was small, but it was a start. She could almost picture it, her son, playing in the front yard, the two of them cooking dinner together in a real kitchen. It wasn't a mansion, it didn't have to be, but it was something she could afford, if only she had the money. A bitter laugh escaped her lips, and she quickly covered her mouth. "It's not going to happen, Marissa," she muttered under her breath, shaking her head. "Not for you. Not ever." Just then, Karen came up to her. "Hey, you've got a customer waiting for a refill," she said, snapping Marissa out of her thoughts. Marissa turned to find a woman sitting at the corner booth, flipping through a magazine. The woman looked out of place, polished, almost out of place in a diner like this. She wore an expensive coat, her nails perfectly manicured. She didn't belong here. Marissa took a deep breath, straightening her shoulders before walking over. "Refill for you, ma'am?" The woman looked up, her eyes briefly scanning Marissa before settling on her coffee cup. "Yes, please. I'm in a bit of a rush," she said, her tone clipped. Marissa poured the coffee into the woman's cup, trying not to let the contempt she felt show on her face. Another person who would never know what it was like to scrape by, to count every penny just to make it through the day. The woman took a sip and nodded her approval, not looking up from her magazine. As Marissa walked away, she felt the sting of being invisible all over again. This woman would never know her struggles, never understand the weight of her life. They would never be in the same world. She was just another worker, another face in the crowd. But for a brief moment, Marissa wondered what it would feel like to be that woman. To sit in a diner, enjoying a peaceful morning, not worried about the rent or the bills or how to make ends meet. It was a foreign feeling, one she wasn't sure she'd ever know. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. By the time her shift ended, her feet ached, her back was stiff, and her mind was heavy. She was exhausted, but there was no time to rest. She grabbed her things and left the diner, heading back to the bus stop. Another day, another dollar, she thought grimly. The sun was setting now, the sky painted in hues of orange and purple as the bus rumbled beneath her. She thought about the house again, about what it would be like to own it. The thought of it made her chest tighten. But then, as she looked out the window, she saw a for sale sign in front of another house. A bigger house with a large yard and a beautiful porch. It was out of her reach, she knew that. But for the first time, the idea of owning a home didn't seem so impossible. Maybe it wasn't just a dream after all. Maybe there was a way out of this endless cycle. For the first time in a long while, Marissa felt something shift inside her. A tiny, but powerful sense of hope. The next few weeks were a blur of early mornings and late nights. Marissa had started her new job as a receptionist at a real estate agency, a position that, on paper, should have been a step forward. But every morning as she put on her slightly too large blouse and stepped into her worn-out shoes, the nagging feeling of being out of place followed her like a shadow. The office was bright, polished, and modern. Everything Marissa's life wasn't. She often felt the eyes of her co-workers on her, measuring her, scrutinizing her with a quiet judgment that she couldn't shake. The office had a cold, corporate feel, its walls lined with glossy brochures and framed photos of properties she could only dream of owning. Marissa knew she was lucky to have even gotten this job, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong. Every time the phone rang, every email pinged, she found herself fumbling over her responses, wondering if the world was expecting more from her than she was capable of giving. The truth was, Marissa didn't feel ready for this. She had spent years running on autopilot, doing just enough to get by, never truly living. She had the bare minimum, and even that felt like it could slip away at any moment. Her last few months at the diner had been a constant grind of exhaustion. But here, at the real estate office, she wasn't sure if she was ready for what was expected of her. The women who worked around her were sleek, professional, polished. They wore heels that clicked on the tiled floors, their designer handbags swinging in sync with their steps. She, on the other hand, felt like a misfit in cheap flats, struggling to keep up with the fast pace of the office. But there was something in the air, something new, that kept her going. Every phone call, every brief interaction with a client felt like a small victory. No one knew her past, her struggles, her constant battle to stay afloat. Here, she was just another receptionist, just another part of the system. And, in a strange way, that was the most liberating thing she'd ever felt. She could reinvent herself, or at least make people think she was someone new. One afternoon, the office was especially quiet, with only the faint hum of the air conditioning filling the silence. Marissa sat behind her desk, absent-mindedly sorting through papers, when a man walked in. He was tall, with an air of confidence that filled the room. His suit was impeccably tailored, his shoes polished to perfection. His dark hair was styled just right, and his eyes scanned the room with practiced indifference, as though he didn't need to notice the people around him. "Excuse me," he said, his voice smooth, but with an edge of impatience. "I'm looking for Ms. Montgomery. Is she available?" Marissa looked up from her desk, suddenly aware of the fact that she hadn't been paying attention. "Oh, Ms. Montgomery isn't in right now," she said, trying to sound confident. "Can I take a message?" The man hesitated, studying her for a brief moment. "I was hoping to speak with someone about purchasing a property. It's urgent." "Of course," Marissa said, her voice a little shaky but managing to keep it steady. "I can help you with that. If you'd like to leave your details, I'll make sure Ms. Montgomery gets back to you as soon as possible." The man raised an eyebrow, clearly unsure of her ability to handle his request, but he gave in. He handed her a business card, the edges sleek and professional, as though it had been custom-made. "You can have her call me. I'll be at this number all day." "Thank you," Marissa said, taking the card and doing her best to smile. As soon as the man walked out, she sank back into her chair, her hands shaking ever so slightly. She'd never felt so out of place in her life. The idea of handling big clients, rich business people, felt foreign. She was just a small-town girl, someone who had barely managed to stay afloat in the life she had. And yet, here she was, supposed to be the first line of contact for people who were buying houses worth millions. But that night, when Marissa got home and her son, Sam, ran up to greet her with a hug, she felt a flicker of something more than just doubt. There was something about this job that could change things. It was the first time in a long time that she felt she could have control over her own future. She wasn't just a waitress anymore, struggling to make ends meet. She was working in real estate, a field where things could change. Maybe not right away, but soon. "I'm proud of you, Mom," Sam said as he hugged her tightly. His words, though simple, filling her with a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. "Thanks, buddy," Marissa replied, holding him tight. She knew she had to keep fighting for him, for herself, for the life she wanted them both to have. The next few days passed in a blur of phone calls and paperwork. Marissa learned quickly, adapting to the rhythm of the office. She still felt like an outsider, but she also felt like she was on the verge of something. The house she had been dreaming of for years, the one across the street, was now listed for sale again. And this time it felt different. She could feel it in her gut. One morning, after a particularly exhausting day of answering calls and helping clients find homes, Marissa sat at her desk, glancing out the window at the house. She didn't even know if she could afford it yet, but for the first time, she started to wonder if she might be able to make it happen. As if on cue, her phone rang. It was her manager, Karen, calling with a new assignment. "Marissa," Karen said briskly, "we need someone to handle a property showing this afternoon. It's for a big client, and I think you're ready to take it on." Marissa's heart skipped a beat. "What kind of property is it?" she asked, trying to keep the nervousness out of her voice. "Something high-end," Karen replied. "A luxury home, big price tag." You'll need to know the details, but I'm confident you'll do fine." The words hit her like a wave. She didn't know if she was ready, but she had to be. She couldn't back out now. Not when she was so close. "Okay, I'll handle it," Marissa said, her voice surprisingly firm. As the afternoon passed and Marissa prepared for the showing, she couldn't help but think back to that house. The one she had always dreamed of. The one she thought she could never have. The idea that she might be able to sell homes like this, to people with real wealth, people who saw her as more than just a receptionist, was both terrifying and exhilarating. And so, with newfound determination, Marissa stepped into the world she had once thought was out of her reach. The first step was small. The next one was bigger. She wasn't just going to work in real estate. She was going to rise in it. Marissa W. It, her fingers brushing against the worn wood of her nightstand. The same nightstand she had been using for years. A piece of furniture that had long outlived its usefulness but still stood proudly in the small apartment she called home. The apartment that she and Sam had outgrown, yet still held onto out of sheer necessity. She sat up, running a hand through her tangled hair, the weight of the past few days pressing heavily on her shoulders. Her shift at the office had gone well, but she hadn't been able to shake the image of the house next door. The house that had been listed for months, the one she had walked past 100 times, dreaming about the day when she could afford it. The for sale sign was still in the yard, but this time, it didn't feel like a distant hope. It felt like a possibility, a real, tangible possibility that she might finally be able to make it hers. The house was small, with a wraparound porch and a yard full of overgrown grass. But to Marissa, it was perfect. It was everything she had worked for, everything she had sacrificed. She quickly got dressed, brushing aside the fleeting thoughts of what-ifs and could-be-s. The dream house would remain just that, a dream, unless she did something about it. She had been working hard for the last few weeks, not just at the real estate office but also in her free time, learning everything she could about property investment, homeownership, and mortgages. She'd always been intimidated by the idea of owning a house. It had always felt like something reserved for other people, people who had it all figured out. But now, for the first time, it felt within reach. Marissa left the apartment with a sense of purpose, the sun barely rising as she made her way to the bus stop. She could feel the weight of the house in her mind, every step toward the office feeling like it was one step closer to the life she wanted. When she arrived at the office, Karen handed her a new set of documents to review. "We've got a big showing this weekend," Karen said, glancing over at Marissa. "You're going to need to familiarize yourself with the details of the property. It's high-end, so it'll be a lot of pressure." Marissa nodded, taking the papers from Karen, but her mind was already somewhere else. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out quickly, her heart racing when she saw the notification. "Price reduced, 201 Oak Street. Inquire now." It was the house, the one next door, the one she'd dreamed about. She froze for a moment, staring at the screen. The price had been reduced. It was the sign she had been waiting for, but now it was real. The house was within her reach. She immediately called the number listed on the notification, her hands shaking slightly as she waited for the line to connect. The phone rang several times before a voice on the other end answered. "Hello, this is Brenda from Oak Properties. How can I help you?" "This is Marissa Jackson. I'm interested in the property on Oak Street. I saw the price reduction. Is the house still available?" Marissa's voice felt tight, nervous, but she pressed on. She had to. "Yes, it's still available," Brenda replied. "It's been on the market for a while, but with the price reduction, we've been getting more inquiries. Are you interested in scheduling a viewing?" Marissa's heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was the moment that everything could change. "Yes," she said, almost too quickly. "I'd like to schedule a viewing. As soon as possible." Brenda paused for a moment, likely checking her schedule. "I have an opening this afternoon, around 2 p.m. Would that work for you?" Marissa's stomach fluttered, but she nodded, even though Brenda couldn't see her. "Yes, that works perfectly. Thank you." "Great," Brenda said. "I'll see you at 2 p.m. I'll send you the details shortly." The call ended, and Marissa stood there for a moment, the weight of what had just happened sinking in. She was going to see the house. The house that had always been out of reach was now something she could step into. The reality of it hit her like a wave, and for a moment, she was unsure whether to be terrified or excited. She took a deep breath, steadied herself, and got to work. The next few hours passed in a blur, her mind racing with everything she needed to do to prepare for the viewing. The house had been listed for a while, and now it felt like the clock was ticking. She couldn't afford to waste time. Not now, not when she was so close. When the clock finally hit 2 p.m., she left the office, her hands clammy, her nerves on edge. She arrived at the property a little early, standing across the street for a moment, her eyes locked on the house. It looked exactly as it had every time she walked by, but now it felt different, felt possible. The house wasn't just a dream anymore. It was something real, something that could belong to her. She crossed the street and walked up the driveway, her footsteps echoing in the silence. Brenda greeted her at the door, a friendly but professional smile on her face. "Welcome, Marissa," Brenda said. "It's great to finally meet you in person. Come on in. Let me show you around." The interior of the house was everything Marissa had imagined. The old hardwood floors creaked underfoot, but it was a good kind of creak, the kind that told stories. The living room had large windows that let in the sunlight, casting warm beams across the room. The kitchen was outdated, but it had potential. It had the bones of a home, a place that could become something beautiful with a little love. Marissa couldn't help but feel a sense of awe as she moved through the house. It was hers for the taking, or so it seemed. After the tour, they stood outside in the yard, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the grass. Marissa looked around, her heart racing. This was it. This was her chance to take control of her future, to finally own something that was hers. "I'll think about it," she said, her voice steady despite the excitement bubbling inside her. She had to be careful. She had to take her time. But part of her was already envisioning Sam running through the yard, their new life unfolding before them. As Marissa drove home that evening, her mind was flooded with thoughts of the house. It wasn't just a property anymore. It was a symbol of everything she had fought for, everything she had worked toward. It was proof that, despite the years of struggle, there was still a chance for something better. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to imagine the possibility of a life beyond survival. A life where she wasn't just getting by, but actually living. The next few days passed in a blur of paperwork and phone calls. Marissa had made her offer on the house, but she was trying to keep her expectations low. The process of buying a house was far more complicated than she had ever imagined. Even with the price reduction, it was still a big commitment. She wasn't sure if she could pull it off, but for the first time in her life, she was determined to try. Her manager, Karen, had noticed the shift in her lately. Marissa had become quieter, more focused, and a little more distant. It wasn't that she wasn't doing her job. In fact, she was excelling at it. But something had changed. Something in her had clicked. And Karen, being as perceptive as she was, had noticed it too. "Hey, Marissa," Karen said one morning, as she passed by Marissa's desk. "You're doing great work lately. I'm impressed." Marissa looked up from her computer, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Thanks," she said, a little caught off guard by the compliment. "I'm serious," Karen continued. "You've been handling everything like a pro. I think you're ready for more responsibility." Marissa's heart skipped a beat. More responsibility. The thought of taking on more work, more pressure, had always intimidated her. But something about Karen's words felt different this time. For once, it didn't feel like a test. It didn't feel like she was being pushed to prove herself. It felt like an invitation to step into the next phase of her life. "I'm ready," Marissa said before she could second-guess herself. "I'll take on whatever you need." Karen smiled, nodding approvingly. "Good. I'll get you started on a few more tasks, and we'll see how it goes." Marissa's shift in mindset wasn't just a result of her job. It was the house. The idea of owning it, of building a life for her and Sam that was free from constant worry, had sparked something in her. something that she hadn't realized was missing until now: the belief in herself. That night, after a long shift at the diner, Marissa sat at the kitchen table, her mind buzzing with thoughts of the house and the new responsibilities at work. She glanced over at Sam, who was sitting on the couch, playing with his video game console. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with the same quiet trust he always had in her. "Mom," Sam said, his voice soft, "when we move into the new house, can we get a dog?" The question caught Marissa off guard. It was such a small thing, but it hit her hard. For years, they had lived in cramped spaces, moving from one apartment to the next. Sam had never had a backyard to play in, never had a space that truly felt like home. And now, the possibility of that was real. A dog, a backyard, a place they could call their own. She smiled, the weight of her exhaustion fading away for a moment. "Sure, kiddo," she said. "When we move into the house, we can get a dog." That night, as Marissa lay in bed, she allowed herself to dream. She dreamed of the house, of Sam playing outside with a dog by his side, of a future where they weren't just scraping by but thriving. But she also knew that this wasn't going to be easy. She had just started the process, and there were still many steps ahead. The road to homeownership wasn't just about money. It was about making the right decisions, knowing when to push forward and when to pull back. The next day, she got a call from Brenda at Oak Properties. "Marissa, I've got good news," Brenda said, her voice light and upbeat. "Your offer has been accepted." For a moment, Marissa didn't know how to respond. She felt like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. The house was hers. For the first time in her life, something big had gone in her favor. "Are you serious?" Marissa's voice cracked, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the phone. "I'm serious," Brenda replied. "It's yours, pending the paperwork and closing. But congratulations, Marissa. You did it." The words didn't feel real. She was still processing them when Sam walked into the room, his eyes wide with curiosity. "What happened, Mom?" he asked, sensing the change in the air. Marissa turned to him, her face breaking into a grin. "We got the house, Sam. It's ours." Sam's face lit up in a way that made Marissa's heart swell. "We really got it?" he asked, barely able to believe it. "We really got it," Marissa confirmed, her voice steady now. She could see the joy in his eyes, and it made everything worth it. The late nights, the sacrifices, the fears, they had all led to this moment. But the next few days brought their own challenges. There were papers to sign, contracts to go over, and financing to secure. Each step felt like a hurdle, but Marissa faced them with a new resolve. She didn't back down. She didn't let the fear creep in. For the first time, she was fighting for something more than just survival. She was fighting for a life she had always dreamed of, a life she could finally give to Sam. The small wins add up. In the days that followed, Marissa found herself learning more about real estate than she ever thought she would. She read articles, attended workshops, and spoke to experts. It was a slow process, but each new piece of information gave her more confidence. She wasn't just taking the role of a receptionist anymore. She was starting to see herself as a future property owner, someone who could rise above the life she had always known. At work, she continued to impress Karen with her initiative. She started taking on more tasks, more responsibility, until it felt like she was running the office. She wasn't just the person who answered phones anymore. She was the person people went to for help, for guidance. She had earned their respect, and it felt like a small win in itself. But it wasn't just at work. Marissa noticed the change in how people treated her. It wasn't as if they were showering her with praise, but the subtle shifts were enough. The way they asked her opinion on things, the way they smiled when she walked by, even the way Karen now spoke to her, it was all different. She was different, and in that quiet difference, Marissa found her strength. The phone call had come at a bad time. It always did, didn't it? Marissa stared at the number on the screen, a number she hadn't seen in months, maybe longer. She recognized it instantly, her father's. He hadn't called since she'd left for good, nearly 5 years ago. It wasn't the kind of call she expected to get, not after all this time. Her heart pounded as she sat at the kitchen table, The house now just a looming dream, still beyond her reach. The world outside was quiet, the evening sun fading into the horizon. But inside, Marissa's pulse was racing. She'd been through too much to go back to the past. She'd fought her way out of the shadows, out of the cycles that had held her in place. But the call? It was like a tether, pulling her back to a life she didn't want to revisit. She let the phone ring through once, twice. It was as if she could feel the weight of the decision she was about to make. Should she answer? Should she ignore it? Continue forward and keep this chapter of her life firmly closed? Her fingers hovered over the screen before she swiped it up. Hello. There was a long pause, and then her father's voice came through, rough and familiar. Marissa. Dad? She replied, keeping her tone even, but the word felt foreign in her mouth. She hadn't used it in years. Not since the last time he'd called, demanding she come back home, making her feel like she was nothing but a disappointment. I know it's been a while, her father began, his voice low. I've been meaning to call, but you know how it is. Things get busy. Marissa clenched her jaw, feeling the weight of his words press down on her. Things get busy, huh? You mean things get easier when I'm not around to remind you of how you failed me? The silence on the other end of the line stretched for a long beat. Then, in a much quieter voice, her father spoke again, his tone softer than she remembered. I'm sorry. I know I didn't do right by you. I'm not asking for forgiveness, but I think you deserve to know I'm not the same man I was. I've changed. Marissa swallowed hard, her throat tight. Her father's apology, if it even was one, didn't mean much to her anymore. It hadn't been enough back then, and it wasn't enough now. But hearing him speak, hearing the regret in his voice, it stirred something inside her, a pain she had buried deep for so long. The memories flooded back. She thought about the long nights spent with her mother, crying over bills they couldn't pay, arguing over things they couldn't change. She thought about the way her father would walk out every time things got tough, leaving her mother to pick up the pieces, leaving Marissa to try to understand the mess he had left behind. I've been working hard to fix things, Marissa, her father continued. I know I haven't been there for you, but I'm trying to make up for it now. I was wondering if you'd come visit sometime. Maybe we could talk in person. She felt a pang in her chest, the words catching in her throat. The thought of going back, of facing everything she had worked so hard to leave behind, made her stomach churn. Dad, she started, but her words were stuck. What was there to say? What was there left to say? Marissa had learned a long time ago that forgiveness wasn't something she could give to him easily. It wasn't just the hurt he had caused her. It was the way he made her feel small, invisible, unworthy. She had spent years breaking free from that version of herself, the one who had learned to stay silent, to be overlooked. She couldn't go back. Not now, not when she was this close to everything she had fought for. I don't know, she said, her voice finally steady. I don't know if I can do that, Dad. I've spent so long getting away from all of this. I can't just go back and pretend that everything's fine. There was another silence, longer this time. She could hear him breathing on the other end, as if he didn't know what to say next. She could practically hear him searching for the right words, and for a moment, she almost felt bad for him. Almost. I understand, he said after a while, but if you ever change your mind, I'm here. And I'm sorry for everything, Marissa. Before she could reply, he hung up. The finality of it left her standing in the kitchen, the phone still warm in her hand. The truth was, she hadn't expected him to change. She hadn't expected him to suddenly become the father she had always wanted. People didn't change overnight. They didn't just undo the hurt they caused. And while part of her wanted to believe in him, to believe in the possibility of redemption, another part of her knew that she had moved on. She couldn't go back. She couldn't allow the man who had torn apart her sense of self-worth to come back and reclaim a part of her that she had worked so hard to build. But that didn't mean it didn't hurt. The emptiness she had carried for so long was never fully filled. The longing for something more, for a family that had always been out of reach, still clung to her, no matter how many years had passed. She set the phone down on the kitchen counter and walked over to the window, her fingers tracing the edge of the frame. Outside, the sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. The house next door was still there, still waiting for her. The dream house. She thought about the man who had once told her she'd never make it. She thought about the people who had doubted her at every turn, about the times she'd been ignored, dismissed, and forgotten. But she wasn't forgotten anymore. She had fought for this life, fought for the right to own something, to have something that was truly hers. And now, that fight was more than just a struggle for survival. It was about building something new, something stronger. She wasn't going to let the past define her. Not anymore. The days blurred into one another, each one starting with the familiar scent of coffee brewing in the morning and ending with the quiet exhaustion of a job well done. But today, there was something different in the air. It wasn't just the paperwork or the phone calls that had kept her busy for the past few days. It was the realization that, for the first time in her life, Marissa was in control. The house was no longer just a distant dream. It was real and it was happening. Her offer had been accepted, the loan had gone through, and now all that was left was the closing. There were still hurdles to jump, still forms to sign and inspections to pass, but the house was officially hers. And with that came a sense of power that Marissa had never felt before. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. Walking through the front door of her apartment after work that evening, Marissa stood still for a moment. The space she had lived in for so well. She had spent here the long nights of doubt, the constant balancing of bills and responsibilities. She had always made do, always gotten by. But this was different. She wasn't going to make do anymore. She was going to thrive. As she moved through the small apartment, packing away the last of her belongings, a sense of finality settled over her. She was leaving this place behind. She was moving on to something better, something that she had earned, not by chance, but by sheer determination. Sam was sitting on the couch, flipping through a comic book, his legs stretched out in front of him. He looked up when she entered the room, a smile spreading across his face. "Are we really moving?" he asked, his voice full of excitement and disbelief. Marissa smiled back, her heart swelling with love for the boy who had been her reason for everything. "We're really moving," she said, her voice filled with a quiet certainty. "And it's going to be amazing." Sam jumped off the couch, his excitement contagious. "Can we go see the new house again? Can we play in the yard? Are we getting a dog too?" Marissa laughed, the sound rich and full of hope. "Yes, yes, and yes. We're gonna have a whole new life there, Sam. A real life." As she continued packing, she couldn't help but think about the journey it had taken to get here. There had been so many times when she had doubted herself, when she had wondered if she was ever going to break free from the cycle of poverty and self-doubt. But now, standing at the threshold of something new, she realized that everything she had gone through had led her to this moment. Every setback, every sacrifice, every tear had been worth it. She had earned this. The phone rang, pulling her from her thoughts. She picked it up, seeing Brenda's name on the screen. "Marissa." Brenda's voice was bright and cheerful. "I'm happy to tell you that the closing is scheduled for tomorrow. Everything is set. You're officially the owner of 201 Oak Street." Marissa's heart skipped a beat. Tomorrow. It was happening tomorrow. She hadn't expected it to come this fast. But now that it had, she was filled with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "I can't believe it," Marissa said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you so much, Brenda. This means more to me than you know." Brenda's laughter came through the line, warm and comforting. "You did the work, Marissa. You earned it. Now enjoy it." As she hung up the phone, Marissa took a moment to let the reality of the situation settle in. She was going to own a house, a real house, not just a place to live, but a home, a foundation for the life she and Sam had always dreamed of. It was more than just walls and a roof. It was a symbol of her strength, her perseverance, and her refusal to give up. The next day, she stood in the small office at the closing, surrounded by papers and legal jargon she didn't fully understand, but it didn't matter. She had come this far. She was signing her name on the dotted line, and with each stroke of the pen, she was leaving behind the version of herself that had ever doubted her worth. The moment the papers were signed, the deal was finalized, and she was handed the keys to her new home. Marissa felt a wave of emotion wash over her. This wasn't just about the house. It was about everything she had worked for, everything she had fought for, everything she had overcome. "Congratulations, Marissa," the agent said, her voice warm and sincere. "It's all yours." Marissa nodded, barely able to speak, her throat tight with emotion. She had made it. She had done the impossible. And now she was going to build something real, something lasting. Later that evening, she stood outside the house on Oak Street, the keys in her hand, Sam by her side. The house, with its creaky porch and overgrown yard, stood before them, waiting to be filled with life, love, and memories. It wasn't perfect, not yet, but it could be. It would be. "This is ours, Sam," she said softly, the words barely above a whisper. "This is our new beginning." Sam looked up at her, his eyes wide with awe. "Really? Ours?" Marissa smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "Really? And we're going to make it the best home we've ever had." As they walked inside together, Marissa knew that the journey wasn't over. There would be challenges ahead, moments of doubt, obstacles to overcome. But for the first time in her life, she felt prepared. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a fighter, a creator, a builder. And this house, this life, was the foundation of everything she was going to become. Marissa stood in the middle of the living room, her hands on her hips, surveying the space that had once seemed so out of reach. Now it was her domain. The boxes, still scattered across the floor, represented the beginning of something new, but the house itself, the creaky hardwood floors, the faint smell of old wood, the peeling paint on the windowsills, had already started to feel like home. Sam's laughter echoed from upstairs as he explored his new room, testing out every corner and jumping on the bed, his joy contagious. Marissa couldn't help but smile, her heart swelling at the sight. This wasn't just about buying a house. It was about creating a space where she and Sam could grow, a place they could truly call their own. For the first time in years, Marissa felt like she had everything she needed to build a future, one step at a time. The house wasn't perfect. The kitchen needed work, the roof had a few leaks that would need attention, and the backyard, though spacious, was a jungle of overgrown weeds and unkempt grass. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that it was theirs. It was the beginning of something Marissa had dreamed of for so long. She spent the next few weeks settling in, slowly turning the house into a home. She painted the walls in soft, welcoming colors, organized the boxes, and unpacked the mismatched furniture that had followed them from apartment to apartment. There were small repairs to make, things that would take time, but the work didn't feel like a burden anymore. It felt like opportunity. Each brushstroke on the walls, each nail in the doorframe, was a testament to her resilience and determination. This wasn't just about filling a space with belongings. It was about filling it with life. At work, Marissa was thriving. Karen had given her more responsibilities, and her colleagues had started to notice her confidence. She wasn't just the receptionist anymore. She was becoming a key player in the office, offering ideas, handling clients, and even assisting with property viewings. She felt the shift within herself, too. The woman who had once doubted her own abilities, who had been afraid to speak up, was starting to take charge. It was as though the house had given her more than just a place to live. It had given her permission to be more. One afternoon, after a particularly long day at work, Marissa returned to the house to find Sam in the backyard, kneeling on the grass, digging through the dirt. A small smile crossed her face as she walked over to him. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice soft, amused. "I'm planting a garden," Sam replied, his brow furrowed in concentration. "I want to grow vegetables. That way we can eat our own food. I think it'll be cool." Marissa knelt beside him, her fingers brushing the soil. "A garden, huh? Well, that's a great idea. We'll start small and see what we can grow. Maybe some tomatoes or cucumbers. What do you think?" Sam grinned, nodding enthusiastically. Yeah, and maybe some strawberries too. I love strawberries. The sight of Sam, so determined to make this place his own, filled Marissa with a deep sense of pride. It wasn't just about the house. It was about what they were building here, together. Sam had never had a yard before, never had a place where he could run freely, plant things and watch them grow. This wasn't just a house. This was a future. And for the first time in a long time, Marissa felt like she was doing it right. She was creating something for Sam that she hadn't had, something rooted in stability and love. As they worked on the garden together, Marissa realized that this was the life she had always wanted. Not the big house with endless luxuries, but a simple, grounded life with purpose. The house didn't need to be perfect. It just needed to be a place where they could thrive. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Karen at work. Marissa, we have a big property coming up. I think you'd be perfect for the showing. It's a luxury home in a great location. You ready for it? Marissa's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The opportunity she had been waiting for. She had worked hard to get to this point, and now the chance to represent a property like this was a dream come true. But as she read the message again, she realized something. She wasn't just ready for it. She was more than ready. She typed back, her fingers steady despite the excitement coursing through her veins. Yes, I'm ready. The quiet transformation. Marissa spent the next few days preparing for the showing, diving deep into the details of the property. This wasn't just about presenting a house. It was about presenting herself. She wasn't the same woman who had stumbled into this world months ago, unsure and uncertain. She had found her place. She had worked hard, learned, and earned the right to be here. When the day of the showing arrived, she stood tall, her suit fitted perfectly, her hair neatly pulled back. The luxury home was stunning. Everything Marissa had imagined and more. But as she walked through the property with the potential buyers, explaining the features and highlighting the best aspects of the home, she wasn't intimidated. She was confident. She was in control. This was her moment, and she was going to make the most of it. The buyers seemed impressed, nodding as Marissa detailed the history of the house, the upgrades, the neighborhood. She spoke with authority, but there was warmth in her tone, a sincerity that made the buyers listen. As the showing ended, one of the buyers turned to her. "You've got a great eye for these properties," he said, shaking her hand. "We'll definitely be in touch." Marissa smiled, holding back the surge of emotion that threatened to overtake her. This wasn't just a successful showing. It was a moment of validation, a moment where all the hard work, all the self-doubt had finally paid off. She wasn't just a receptionist anymore. She was an expert, professional, and more than anything, she was on her way to something bigger. That night, as she walked into her house, the familiar feeling of pride washed over her once again. The place was still a work in progress. There was still so much to do. More boxes to unpack, repairs to be made, dreams to chase. But as Marissa stood in the doorway, she realized that this was more than just a house. It was the foundation of everything she had fought for. It was her new beginning, and it was only just starting. Sam's laughter echoed through the house as he called from the kitchen, excited about the strawberries he had planted in the garden. Marissa smiled as she closed the door behind her. This was her life now, and she was going to make it count. The house felt different now. It wasn't just the fresh coat of paint or the slowly filling rooms, or even the hum of the refrigerator running in the background. No, it was something more. It was the sense that this place had truly become theirs. The garden Sam had planted in the backyard was growing, the little sprigs of green reaching for the sun as if they, too, were claiming their place in the world. The house had become a living thing, just as Marissa had. It wasn't perfect, not yet. The kitchen still needed work, and the roof would need to be fixed come spring. But it was theirs. It was a reminder that no matter where she had come from, no matter how many people had doubted her, she had built this. She had taken the broken pieces of her past and used them to create something strong, something unshakable. But even as Marissa stood at the kitchen counter one evening, peeling vegetables for a simple dinner, a sense of uncertainty lingered at the back of her mind. The house, the job, the new life. It was all moving so fast. She had pushed so hard to get here, to build something better for Sam, to give him the life she never had. But now that she was here, she felt a nagging question she hadn't allowed herself to ask until now. Was she ready for this? The truth was, Marissa didn't know what came next. She had fought tooth and nail to get to this point, but now that she had everything she wanted, the weight of responsibility started to settle on her shoulders. The fear of failure, the fear of not being enough, those old feelings crept back in. She had worked hard for this house, for her job, for Sam's future. But what if she lost it all? What if, like so many times before, it all slipped through her fingers? She shook the thought from her mind, refusing to entertain it. She wasn't going to let herself go back to that place, to the person she used to be, the one who doubted herself, the one who couldn't see her own potential. No, this was her moment. She had fought for this, and she was going to keep fighting. As she chopped the carrots, a small, familiar voice broke through her thoughts. "Mom?" Sam's voice called from the living room. Marissa glanced over her shoulder, smiling at the sight of her son sitting on the couch, his comic book spread out in front of him. "What is it, sweetheart?" "I was thinking," Sam said, his eyes bright, "maybe we can throw a party for the house. You know, like a celebration for us being here. We can invite some people over, your friends from work, maybe?" Marissa's heart swelled at the idea. It wasn't just about the house, it was about the life they were building here. A life where they could be together, where they could share their victories and their small wins, where they could laugh and love without fear of what came next. "I love that idea, Sam," she said, walking over to him and kneeling beside the couch. "We can invite everyone over, and we'll make it the best party ever. What do you think? Should we have a theme?" Sam's face lit up with excitement. "We can have a superhero theme. I can dress up like Spider-Man." Marissa laughed, ruffling his hair. "You got it, kiddo. Spider-Man it is." That evening, as Marissa and Sam made plans for their small celebration, something shifted inside Marissa. It was a quiet, unspoken shift, but it was there all the same. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. She was living on her own terms, making decisions that were right for her and her family, not based on what others thought or expected of her. She had built this life from the ground up, and now it was time to enjoy it. The party was planned for the weekend. By then, the house would be ready. Ready for friends, ready for family, ready to be shared. Marissa's thoughts turned to her colleagues at work, the people who had seen her grow from a nervous receptionist to a key player in the office. She thought about Karen, who had believed in her when no one else did, who had given her the chance to prove herself. Marissa was no longer the woman who simply answered phones and filed paperwork. She was a woman with a purpose, a woman who had proven she could handle anything that came her way. The night before the party, as Marissa set the table with plates and napkins, Sam came running into the kitchen, a wide grin on his face. "Mom, I finished planting the last of the seeds in the garden. They're all ready for the summer." Marissa smiled, putting down the plate she had been setting. "That's amazing, Sam. I'm so proud of you." Sam beamed, his excitement infectious. "It's going to be so cool. We're going to have the best garden ever." As she watched him, Marissa realized that this was the life she had fought for. A life filled with growth, with small victories, with love. It wasn't always easy, and it wouldn't always be perfect, but it was hers. The next afternoon, as the first guests began to arrive for their small celebration, Marissa stood at the door, greeting them with a sense of pride that was as much about the house as it was about herself. She had done it. She had made it. She had built something real. She had created a space for herself and Sam, one that wasn't defined by the mistakes of the past but by the strength of the present. As she looked around at the people gathered in her new home, the sound of laughter and conversation filling the air, Marissa felt a quiet sense of triumph settle over her. She had fought for this life. She had fought for the right to call this place home. And she had won. "Here's to new beginnings," she said, raising a glass of lemonade. "To our new home, and to the journey ahead." Everyone cheered, the clink of glasses and the hum of voices blending together. In that moment, Marissa knew that no matter what came next, she had the strength to handle it. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a fighter, a builder, a woman who had taken control of her own destiny. And that, she realized, was the greatest victory of all. The evening sun dipped below the horizon, casting a soft glow across the room as Marissa sat in her favorite chair, looking out the window. The soft hum of conversation and laughter drifted from the living room, where the guests she'd invited were enjoying themselves. Sam was in the backyard with some of the other kids, his laughter ringing through the air as they played games among the freshly planted garden beds. For the first time in what felt like forever, Marissa felt peace. This house, this life, everything she had worked for was finally coming together. She thought about how far she had come, how the struggles, the pain, the constant doubts had all led her to this moment. She could hardly believe it. It wasn't that long ago she had been living paycheck to paycheck, scraping by just to make ends meet. She had felt invisible, as though the world had forgotten about her. She had carried the weight of the past on her shoulders. Failed relationships, unspoken words, and the ever-present shadow of self-doubt. But now, she was sitting in her own home, surrounded by people who cared about her, in a place that was truly hers. The house wasn't just a house anymore. It was a symbol of her strength, her resilience, and the courage it took to change her life. Every room told a story. The kitchen was filled with the smell of freshly baked cookies Sam had helped her make that afternoon. The living room was filled with warmth, laughter, and the kind of peace that only a home can bring. And as she looked out the window, watching Sam run across the yard, she realized that this house was more than just bricks and wood. It was the foundation of a new life. Marissa thought about the path that had led her here. The job at the real estate office, the decision to buy this house, the long nights of doubt and uncertainty. She had faced so many obstacles, so many moments when she could have given up. But she didn't. She had kept going. And now, here she was, living the life she had once only dreamed of. Her phone buzzed on the table, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Karen at work. "Hey Marissa, I just wanted to check in and say how impressed I've been with you. You've really come into your own, and I can see you doing big things in this industry. Keep up the great work. You've earned it." Marissa smiled, reading the message. Person she had been when she started. She wasn't the person who had been too afraid to speak up, too afraid to go after what she wanted. She had stepped into the version of herself that had always been there, just waiting to be discovered. The doorbell rang, pulling her from her thoughts. She got up to answer it, opening the door to find Emily, her neighbor from down the street, standing with a bottle of wine in her hands. "Hey Marissa," Emily said, her face lighting up with a friendly smile. "I just wanted to bring you this as a little housewarming gift. I know we don't know each other all that well, but I've been watching you over the last few months, and I just wanted to say, I'm proud of you." Marissa blinked, surprised by the sincerity in Emily's words. She had never expected to hear that from her. "Thank you," Marissa said, taking the bottle from Emily and giving her a warm smile. "That means a lot to me." Emily stepped inside, looking around the house with wide eyes. "It's beautiful, Marissa. I can't believe how much you've done already. You really turned this place into a home." Marissa's smile widened as she led Emily into the living room, where the sounds of the party continued. "It's still a work in progress, but we're getting there, one step at a time." As they joined the others in the living room, Marissa felt a sense of gratitude wash over her. She was surrounded by people who saw her for who she truly was, not just the woman who had once been broken, but the woman who had risen from that place. In that moment, everything felt right. Everything felt as it should be. Later that evening, after the guests had left and Sam had gone to bed, Marissa stood by the window, looking out over the quiet street. The house next door, the one she had always admired, was now part of her story. But it wasn't just the house. It was everything that had led her here. The work, the sacrifices, the quiet determination. Her phone buzzed again, and this time, it was a message from her ex-husband, Charles. She had almost forgotten about him. About the man who had once told her she would always be broke, who had abandoned her when things got tough. She had moved on from that chapter of her life, but for some reason, she felt the need to read the message. Marissa, I just wanted to say that I saw the house you bought. I know I haven't been around, but I'm proud of you. You did it. For a moment, Marissa just stared at the message, her heart thudding in her chest. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. It was a recognition of her strength, of everything she had achieved despite the odds. She didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. She had already proven everything she needed to prove. To herself, to Sam, to everyone who had doubted her. With a quiet breath, Marissa set her phone down and walked through the house, taking in every corner. The familiar smell of the old wood, the creak of the stairs, the warmth of the kitchen. It was all hers. It was real. And it wasn't just about the house. It was about everything she had fought for and the person she had become. She wasn't just the woman who had been told she would never make it. She was the woman who had built her own future. The woman who had learned to live on her own terms. Marissa paused by the door to Sam's room, peeking in to see him sleeping peacefully in his bed. She smiled, her heart swelling with love. This was her family. This was her life. And it was exactly what she had worked so hard for. As she stood there, looking at her son, she realized that the journey wasn't over. There would always be more to achieve, more to build, more dreams to chase. But for the first time, she didn't feel afraid of what was to come. She felt ready, ready for whatever life had to offer. Marissa Jackson had finally found her place, and she was going to make it count.